Marcus Washington had learned to make himself invisible. At 15 years old and weighing nearly 230 pounds, invisibility seemed impossible, yet he'd mastered the art of blending into hallways, disappearing into corners, and avoiding eye contact at all costs. Jefferson High School had become his prison, and today, like every Friday, he just needed to survive until the final bell rang. His worn backpack hung heavy on his shoulders as he pushed through the double doors into the afternoon sunlight, squinting against the brightness that seemed almost mocking in its cheerfulness. The parking lot stretched before him like a battlefield he had to cross to reach the safety of the city bus stop 3 blocks away. The sound hit him first. A deep, rumbling thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Marcus froze on the school steps, his heart already beginning to race with a familiar dread. But this sound was different from the usual threats he'd learned to recognize. This wasn't the squeal of Derek Patterson's souped-up Mustang or the bass-heavy thump of Trevor Mason's modified Honda. This was something else entirely, something primal and powerful that made the air itself vibrate with barely contained energy. Around the corner of the school building, they appeared like a vision from another world. Motorcycles, dozens of them, rolling in formation with a precision that spoke of years riding together. Chrome gleamed under the afternoon sun, leather jackets bore patches and insignias that told stories of roads traveled and brothers bonded. These weren't the clean-cut weekend riders Marcus had seen in movies. These were real bikers, weathered and tough, with faces that had seen both the beauty and brutality of life on the open road. They pulled into the school parking lot with deliberate slowness, engines growling like caged beasts, commanding attention from every student still lingering on campus. Marcus counted at least 50 bikes, maybe more, spreading across the parking lot in a choreographed display of motorcycle culture at its finest. Leading the pack was a massive man on an even more massive Harley-Davidson, its black paint job accented with flames that seemed to dance in the sunlight. The man's gray beard was braided, his arms covered in tattoos that disappeared under his leather vest. Behind him rode men and women of all ages, united by their love of the road and the brotherhood it created. They were here for a school safety demonstration, Marcus would later learn, part of a community outreach program that brought awareness to motorcycle safety and anti-bullying initiatives. The irony of that mission statement would become apparent in less than 10 minutes. Marcus tried to use the distraction to slip away, taking his usual route along the far edge of the parking lot where the fence line offered some psychological protection. His sneakers, held together by duct tape and hope, scuffed against the pavement as he walked quickly, head down, breathing carefully through his mouth because his nose had been broken twice and never properly healed. He made it 30 feet before he heard the voice that turned his blood to ice water. Well, well, well. Look who thinks he can just waddle away. Derek Patterson's voice carried across the parking lot with practiced cruelty. At 17, Derek had already been held back twice and had perfected the art of making smaller, weaker kids miserable. He stood 6 feet tall, all lean muscle and misplaced rage, with 3 of his crew flanking him like hyenas circling wounded prey. Trevor Mason, Kyle Rodriguez, and Brad Henderson, each one a masterpiece of teenage toxic masculinity, each one responsible for countless bruises hidden under Marcus's oversized clothes. Marcus's feet wanted to run, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Fear had frozen him in place, that old familiar terror that made his hands shake and his vision narrow to a pinpoint. The bikers were still dismounting, still removing helmets and greeting each other, still oblivious to the drama unfolding in the corner of the parking lot. Marcus stood completely alone, exposed and vulnerable, as Derek and his crew closed the distance with predatory smiles. The afternoon sun seemed to dim, the cheerful sounds of the motorcycles fading into background noise as Marcus's world contracted to the 4 figures approaching him with malicious intent. This was going to be bad. Marcus could feel it in his bones, could see it in the extra swagger in Derek's step. Something had set Derek off today, some slight real or imagined, and Marcus was about to pay the price. His backpack suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His legs trembled beneath him. And somewhere in the distance, hidden among the rumbling engines and leather-clad strangers, his only hope of salvation was about to witness something that would change everything. Derek Patterson had been planning this all week. The humiliation he'd suffered in gym class, missing that crucial shot in front of Melissa Crawford, had been eating at him like acid. He needed someone to hurt, someone to break, someone who wouldn't fight back. Marcus Washington had always been the perfect victim, soft and scared, with nobody to defend him and no courage to defend himself. Today would be special though. Today Derek would make an example that every kid at Jefferson High would remember for years to come. The audience of bikers made it even better. He'd show these weekend warrior posers what real toughness looked like. "Hey there, Marcus," Derek said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. We've been looking for you, buddy. We wanted to have a little chat about something important. His crew spread out, forming a loose semicircle that cut off any escape route. Trevor cracked his knuckles with theatrical menace. Kyle pulled out his phone, already recording, because humiliation wasn't complete unless it lived forever on social media. Brad just smiled, that empty smile of someone who enjoyed hurting others for entertainment. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. I don't want any trouble. Please, just let me go home. His eyes darted toward the bikers, hoping someone might notice, might intervene, but they were still gathered near their motorcycles, deep in conversation about rally routes and engine modifications. The distance between Marcus and salvation might as well have been measured in miles instead of yards. Let you go home? Derek laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor. But Marcus, we're just getting started. See, I've been thinking about how you take up so much space in this school, breathing all our air, eating all the cafeteria food. Maybe it's time someone taught you about portion control. He shoved Marcus hard in the chest, sending the bigger boy stumbling backward. The backpack slipped from Marcus's shoulders, hitting the pavement with a thud that scattered books and papers across the asphalt. What happened next unfolded with the horrible inevitability of a nightmare. Derek kicked the scattered books, sending Marcus's history textbook skidding under a parked car. Trevor grabbed Marcus's favorite notebook, the one where he wrote stories and drew pictures to escape his reality, and tore pages from it with deliberate cruelty. Kyle continued filming, providing running commentary like some demonic sports announcer. And there goes his homework. Oh, that's gotta hurt. Ladies and gentlemen, witness the amazing disappearing dignity of Marcus Washington. Marcus dropped to his knees, trying desperately to gather his belongings, his eyes already burning with tears he refused to let fall. Not here. Not now. Not in front of everyone. But Derek wasn't finished. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his shirt, yanking him upward with surprising strength. Look at me when I'm talking to you, fat boy. Look at me. Marcus's eyes met Derek's, and in that moment, he saw nothing human there, just rage and cruelty and a desperate need to prove dominance. You know what your problem is, Marcus? Derek's voice had gone quiet now, more dangerous in its softness. You exist. That's your problem. You take up space that people like me should have. You breathe air that people like me should breathe. You're worthless, you're nothing, and today, right here, right now, I'm going to make sure you understand that. He pulled back his fist, preparing to deliver a blow that would put Marcus on the ground, that would crack something important in both body and spirit. The punch never landed. A hand, calloused and strong, caught Derek's wrist mid-swing with the casual ease of someone swatting away a mosquito. I don't think so, son, a voice rumbled, deep as distant thunder. Derek spun around to find himself face to face with the gray-bearded biker who'd been leading the pack. Up close, the man was even more imposing, standing at least 6'4", with shoulders that seemed wide enough to block out the sun. His eyes, a startling blue against his weathered face, held no anger, just a cold assessment that made Derek's bravado evaporate like morning dew. This doesn't concern you, old man, Derek said, trying to pull his wrist free and failing completely. The biker's grip was iron, unmoving and unshakable. Behind him, Marcus could see the other bikers approaching, spreading out in their own formation, mirroring the semicircle Derek's crew had created but with an authority that came from decades of hard living rather than teenage posturing. Old man? The biker smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Son, I've been riding since before your daddy was born. I've seen punks like you in every town across this country, thinking you're tough because you can terrorize someone who won't fight back. Let me tell you something about tough. He released Derek's wrist but moved forward, forcing the teenager to stumble backward. Tough is standing up when everyone's against you. Tough is going to school every day knowing what waits for you and showing up anyway. Tough is not what you think it is. The gray-bearded biker's name was Samuel Iron Sam Dockery, though Marcus wouldn't learn that until later. Right now, all Marcus knew was that the world had suddenly shifted on its axis, that the natural order of predator and prey had been disrupted by an outside force neither side had anticipated. Sam released Derek's wrist and took a step back, his eyes scanning the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen countless confrontations play out. Behind him, the other bikers had formed a loose perimeter, cutting off any escape routes while simultaneously creating a contained space where this situation could be resolved without interference. Derek rubbed his wrist, his face flushing red with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. In front of his crew, in front of his recording phone, in front of the entire school that seemed to have materialized to watch this confrontation, he'd been stopped by some old biker playing hero. The humiliation burned worse than any physical pain could. "You can't touch me," Derek spat, trying to regain some semblance of control. "That's assault. I could have you arrested. My father's a lawyer, and he'll destroy you." Sam's expression didn't change. "I caught your wrist to prevent you from assaulting this young man. Self-defense, or rather, defense of another. But please, call your lawyer father. I'd love to have that conversation." He turned slightly, addressing the gathered crowd of bikers and students alike. "Anyone here see me assault this boy? Anyone see me do anything other than stop him from throwing a punch at someone on his knees?" Heads shook throughout the crowd. Several students had their phones out, filming everything, and the expressions on their faces had shifted from entertained anticipation to something more complex. They'd seen Derek and his crew terrorize Marcus dozens of times before, had watched and done nothing, had maybe even laughed. But seeing it interrupted, seeing it framed by these outsiders as something wrong rather than just the natural order of high school hierarchy, something fundamental had changed in their perception. Trevor Mason, always the most aggressive of Derek's crew, stepped forward with false bravado. "There's 4 of us and like 50 of you. Real fair fight. You bikers think you're so tough, rolling around in your gang, but you're just bullies on motorcycles." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying the fear he was trying desperately to hide. A woman stepped forward from the biker crowd, her gray hair pulled back in a severe braid, her leather jacket covered in patches from motorcycle rallies across the country. She was perhaps 60 years old, her face lined with years of sun and wind, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that demanded attention. "Gang?" She laughed, but there was steel in the sound. "Son, we're not a gang. We're the Rolling Thunder, a veterans motorcycle club. Every person here has served their country. We've seen real violence, real combat, real consequences. What you 4 are doing isn't tough. It's cowardly." She walked over to where Marcus still knelt on the ground, gathering his scattered belongings with shaking hands. Gently, with a kindness that seemed incongruous with her tough exterior, she helped him to his feet. "You okay, honey?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching his face. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks despite his best efforts to contain them. She squeezed his shoulder, then turned back to Derek and his crew with eyes that had gone cold as winter steel. "Let me tell you boys something about respect," she continued, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "Real strength isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who you can protect. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Every man and woman here has put their life on the line for people they've never met. We've lost friends, watched brothers and sisters die defending the idea that everyone deserves dignity and respect. And you 4. She shook her head with genuine disgust. "You're spitting on everything we fought for." Kyle had stopped recording, his phone hanging limply at his side. Brad had taken several steps back, suddenly very interested in studying his shoes. But Derek's pride wouldn't let him back down, wouldn't let him accept defeat in front of everyone. "Whatever," he said, trying to sound dismissive. "This is a school matter. You can't tell us what to do. You're trespassing, and I'm calling security." Sam pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. "That's a good idea. Let's call security. And while we're at it, let's call the police too. Because what I witnessed here was assault, theft, destruction of property, and if I'm not mistaken, recording someone in distress without their consent for the purposes of harassment, which in this state is a misdemeanor that becomes a felony with repeat offenses." He looked at Kyle directly. "How many videos do you have on your phone, son? How many other kids have you and your friends terrorized and recorded?" The color drained from Kyle's face. His phone suddenly felt like radioactive material in his hand. He'd never considered that those videos, those moments of entertainment and social currency, could actually be evidence of crimes. The realization crashed over him like a wave of ice water. We were just joking around," he stammered weakly. "Joking?" Another biker stepped forward, a Latino man with a scar running down the left side of his face and eyes that had seen horrors these teenagers couldn't imagine. "You call making someone cry, destroying their property, physically intimidating them joking? Let me tell you about jokes, kid. A joke is something everyone laughs at, including the person the joke's about. What you're doing has a different name. It's called torture." Principal Jennifer Hartwick had been inside meeting with the Rolling Thunder's coordinator when her secretary burst through the door with reports of a confrontation in the parking lot. By the time she arrived, breathless and worried about liability issues and police reports, she found a scene that looked more like a community gathering than a fight. The bikers had formed a protective circle around Marcus, who sat on one of their motorcycles with a bottle of water someone had given him, his face blotchy from crying but his posture somehow different, straighter. Derek and his crew stood isolated, surrounded by students who were no longer their supporters but their judges. "What is happening here?" Principal Hartwick demanded, her eyes taking in the scene with growing concern. She knew Marcus Washington, knew his file documented repeated incidents of bullying, knew that despite multiple complaints from his mother, the situation had never been adequately addressed. She also knew Derek Patterson's father had threatened the school with lawsuits on 3 separate occasions when his son faced discipline. The politics of school administration had tied her hands more times than she cared to admit. Sam Dockey stepped forward with military precision, his posture respectful but firm. "I'm Samuel Dockey, president of the Rolling Thunder Veterans Motorcycle Club. We're here for the safety demonstration your school invited us to conduct. While preparing for our presentation, we witnessed these 4 young men physically assault, verbally abuse, and destroy the property of this student." He gestured to Marcus. "We intervened to prevent further harm." Principal Hartwick's face went pale. The school had invited these bikers, which meant their testimony carried weight. They were veterans, community members, adults with no connection to teenage drama or school politics. They were exactly the kind of witnesses who could force her hand. "Derek, is this true?" she asked, though the sick feeling in her stomach told her she already knew the answer. Derek's father had always taught him to deny everything, to never admit fault, to shift blame. "They're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus fell. "We were trying to help him up. These bikers attacked me, grabbed my wrist. I want to press charges." "I have it on video," a quiet voice said from the crowd. Everyone turned to see Sarah Chen, a junior with a reputation for photography, holding up her phone. "I was filming the motorcycles for the school newspaper when I saw everything." Derek shoved Marcus. Trevor destroyed his notebook. Derek was about to punch Marcus when Mr. Dockey stopped him. "It's all recorded, with audio." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Sarah had always been invisible too, in her own way, hiding behind her camera rather than bulk like Marcus did. But something about watching the bikers step in, about seeing adults actually do something instead of looking away, had given her courage she didn't know she possessed. "I'll send it to you, Principal Hartwick. And I have about 15 other videos from this year. Different incidents, same victims, always Marcus and a few other kids." Derek's world was crumbling. His carefully constructed image, his power structure built on fear and violence, was collapsing in real time. He looked at his crew, expecting support, but Trevor was staring at the ground, Kyle had tears in his eyes, and Brad had already started walking away. The crowd of students who had once feared or admired him now looked at him with something worse than hatred. They looked at him with pity and disgust. Principal Hartwick pulled out her own phone. "Derek Patterson, Trevor Mason, Kyle Rodriguez, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. I'm calling your parents and the police. Brad Henderson, come back here." Her voice cracked with emotion, years of administrative frustration and moral compromise finally breaking through professional composure. "This ends today." The woman biker, whose name was Rita Sanchez, knelt down beside Marcus. "Honey, I need you to tell me something honestly. Has this been going on all year?" Marcus nodded. "Longer?" Another nod. "Has anyone helped you before today?" Marcus shook his head, and Rita felt her heart break for this child who had faced such cruelty alone. Sam Dockey addressed the gathered students with a voice that commanded absolute attention. "Look at this young man. Really look at him. He comes to school every day knowing what waits for him. He shows up, does his work, tries to live his life despite facing torture that would break most of you. That's real courage. That's real strength. And every single one of you who watched, who filmed, who laughed, who did nothing, you're complicit. You're part of the problem." The words hit like physical blows. Students shifted uncomfortably, looking away, confronting their own actions and inactions for the first time. Social media had made it so easy to be cruel from a distance, to treat real suffering as entertainment. But standing here, seeing Marcus's tear-stained face, seeing the genuine distress they'd helped cause or ignored, the reality of their choices crashed down on them. "We can't ride away and fix this," Sam continued. "This is your school, your community, your responsibility. But what we can do is start a conversation. Real toughness is protecting the vulnerable. Real strength is standing up even when it costs you something. Real courage is choosing kindness when cruelty is easier." He turned to Marcus. "Son, would you be willing to talk with us? To share your story so others can learn from it?" Marcus looked up at these strangers who had done more for him in 10 minutes than anyone had in years. His voice was hoarse from crying, but it was steady when he spoke.
Yes.
If it helped someone else, yes. 3 months had passed since the incident in the parking lot, and Jefferson High School had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. The video Sarah Chen had provided, along with the testimony of 50 veterans and the mounting evidence from other students who finally felt safe coming forward, had resulted in expulsions, criminal charges, and a complete overhaul of the school's anti-bullying policies. Derek Patterson was facing juvenile charges for assault and harassment, attending a different school while awaiting trial. His crew had scattered to their own consequences. But more importantly, something fundamental had shifted in the culture of Jefferson High. Marcus Washington walked through the hallways now with his head up. He'd lost 20 pounds, not from shame or starvation, but from joining the boxing program that Sam Dockey had helped establish at a local community center. The Rolling Thunder had made good on their promise to not just ride away. They'd created a mentorship program, pairing veterans with students who needed support, guidance, or just someone to listen. Marcus trained 3 times a week with Rita Sanchez, who had been an Army combatives instructor before retiring. She taught him that his size could be an advantage, that strength came in many forms, and that defending yourself was a skill anyone could learn. The most profound changes were harder to quantify. Students who had once been bystanders now intervened when they saw others being targeted. A student-led anti-bullying coalition had formed, with Sarah Chen as its president and, surprisingly, Kyle Rodriguez as its most vocal advocate. Kyle had been given a choice by the judge handling his case: complete 200 hours of community service focused on anti-bullying education, or face harsher penalties. What started as legal obligation had transformed into genuine remorse and commitment. He spent his afternoons now speaking to middle school students about the consequences of cruelty, showing them his own videos and forcing them to confront the reality of how their actions affected real people. Principal Hartwick had implemented a zero-tolerance policy that actually meant something, backed by the school board who had finally been forced to prioritize student safety over parental threats and liability concerns. The Rolling Thunder's involvement had brought media attention, and with it, accountability that couldn't be swept under the rug. The school had hired a full-time counselor, established anonymous reporting systems, and created safe spaces where students could decompress without fear of judgment or attack. But the real story wasn't in the policy changes or legal consequences. It was in the small moments that accumulated into a culture shift. It was in the way students now sat with Marcus at lunch, not out of pity but because he was funny and kind and had interesting ideas about everything from comic books to astrophysics. It was in the way Trevor Mason had written Marcus a letter of apology that had taken him weeks to compose, trying to find words adequate to express regret for years of cruelty. It was in the way Brad Henderson had quietly left Jefferson High entirely, unable to face what he'd participated in, now attending online school and working with a therapist to understand his own participation in violence. On a bright Saturday afternoon in early spring, Marcus stood in the parking lot of the community center where he now trained. The Rolling Thunder was hosting a motorcycle safety demonstration, and this time Marcus was part of the program. He'd spent weeks working with Sam and Rita on a presentation about standing up to bullying, about finding your voice, about understanding that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. His hands shook slightly as he held his notes, but the fear felt different now. This was the fear of speaking in public, of being vulnerable in a new way, not the terror of impending violence that had defined his life for so long. "You ready, son?" Sam asked, his hand on Marcus's shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar over the past months. The old biker had become something of a grandfather figure, calling weekly to check in, showing up at Marcus's boxing matches, reminding him that he mattered and was valued. "I'm ready," Marcus said, and he meant it. He walked to the podium set up in front of an audience of students, parents, teachers, and bikers. 50 motorcycles were lined up behind him, their chrome gleaming in the sunlight, silent now but representing the power that came from people choosing to use their strength for protection rather than destruction. Marcus began to speak, his voice clear and steady. He told his story, not sparing the painful details, not sugarcoating the reality of what sustained bullying does to a person's soul. He talked about the days he'd considered suicide, about the nights he'd cried himself to sleep, about the morning he'd decided to just stop showing up to school altogether. He talked about that Friday afternoon when he thought his life was about to get even worse, when he was sure this would be the day Derek finally broke something that couldn't be repaired. And then he talked about the rumble of engines, about gray-bearded strangers who chose to step in, about a woman named Rita who taught him that his body could be strong instead of just a target. He talked about Sam, who had shown him what real masculinity looked like, not dominance and violence, but protection and kindness. He talked about Sarah, who had found courage in witnessing courage. He talked about Kyle, whose redemption arc was still being written but showed that people could choose to change. I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect now, Marcus said, looking out at the crowd. I still have hard days. I still remember every insult, every shove, every moment of humiliation. Those scars don't disappear just because the bullying stopped. But what I want you to understand is that silence protects bullies. Looking away protects bullies. Telling victims to toughen up or ignore it protects bullies. What stops bullying is people choosing to intervene, to speak up, to make it clear that cruelty is unacceptable. He paused, gathering his thoughts for the conclusion he'd practiced a dozen times. To anyone out there who's going through what I went through, you're not alone. You're not weak. You're not worthless. And there are people who will stand with you if you reach out. To anyone who's been a bully, it's not too late to change. The damage you've done is real, but so is your capacity to do better. And to everyone else, the bystanders, you have power you don't even realize. Use it. Step in. Speak up. Be the person someone desperately needs. The applause started slowly, then built to something powerful. Students who had once tormented Marcus, who had laughed at his pain or simply looked away, now stood with tears in their eyes, confronting the weight of their own choices. Parents who had dismissed their children's concerns as typical teenage drama now understood the stakes. Teachers who had been overwhelmed by their own responsibilities now recognized that preventing harm was as important as teaching curriculum. Sam Dockey stepped up to the podium after Marcus finished, wrapping the young man in a bear hug that spoke volumes. This young man right here, Sam said to the crowd, has more courage than most people find in a lifetime. He survived hell and chose to turn that experience into something that helps others. That's heroism. That's real strength. Rita Sanchez added her own words, talking about resilience and recovery, about the military's own struggles with bullying and hazing, about how the lessons learned in combat zones applied to school hallways. Other bikers shared their stories, creating a tapestry of experience that illustrated how cruelty existed everywhere but could be confronted everywhere. As the event wound down and people began to disperse, Marcus found himself surrounded by students from Jefferson High and neighboring schools. They asked questions, shared their own stories, some crying, some angry, all hungry for the message that things could be different. Sarah Chen stood beside him, documenting everything for the Anti-Bullying Coalition's website. Kyle Rodriguez helped answer questions, his own journey from perpetrator to advocate giving him unique credibility. The sun was setting when Marcus finally had a moment alone with Sam and Rita. They stood by Sam's motorcycle, the same one Marcus had sat on that fateful Friday afternoon, and watched the last families loading into cars. You did good today, kid, Rita said, her voice thick with emotion. Real good. I couldn't have done it without you, Marcus replied honestly. Without any of you. You saved my life that day. Not just from Derek, but from what I was becoming. I was disappearing, giving up. You showed me I was worth fighting for. Sam shook his head. We just did what anyone should do. You saved yourself, Marcus. You chose to keep going. You chose to share your story. You chose to turn pain into purpose. That's all you, son. Marcus looked back at the community center, at the banner advertising the anti-bullying program, at the parking lot where so much had changed 3 months ago. He thought about Derek Patterson, who was apparently doing well in therapy and had sent Marcus a letter asking for forgiveness that Marcus wasn't ready to give but might be someday. He thought about Trevor and Brad, each dealing with consequences and hopefully learning lessons that would make them better men. He thought about the dozens of students who had approached him today, confessing their own experiences with bullying or their guilt about participating in it. The world hadn't magically become perfect. Bullying still existed at Jefferson High and every other school in America. But seeds had been planted, conversations had started, and systems had been changed. Most importantly, victims now knew they had allies, bystanders knew they had power, and bullies knew they would face consequences. As Marcus prepared to leave, a young kid approached, maybe 13 years old, skinny and scared-looking, with his mother hovering protectively nearby. Mr. Washington, the kid said quietly. I'm Maximum. I'm starting high school next year, and I'm really scared because I get picked on a lot at my middle school. But listening to you today, it made me feel like maybe I can make it. Maybe it won't always be this bad. Marcus knelt down, looking the kid in the eyes the way Rita had looked at him 3 months ago. Max, I won't lie to you and say it's easy. But you're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. Here's my number, if you ever need someone to talk to, you call me. Deal? Max nodded, clutching the piece of paper like it was a lifeline, and maybe it was. His mother mouthed thank you over his head, tears streaming down her face, and Marcus understood in that moment why he'd agreed to share his story. This was the ripple effect. This was how change happened, one person at a time, one act of courage inspiring another. As the rolling thunder fired up their engines, preparing to ride into the sunset in a scene that seemed almost too perfect to be real, Marcus stood waving goodbye. The rumble of those motorcycles would always mean safety to him now, would always remind him of the day strangers became heroes and victims became survivors. He climbed into his mother's car, she'd been in the audience, crying through his entire speech, and as they drove home through streets that felt safer now, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Real, genuine hope for the future, hope that he could continue making a difference, hope that Max and kids like him wouldn't have to suffer the way he had. The story that had started with humiliation and cruelty had transformed into something else entirely. It had become a testament to the power of intervention, the importance of standing up, and the reality that one moment of courage could change everything. 50 bikers had made 4 bullies regret their choices, but more importantly, they'd shown an entire community what real strength looked like. And Marcus Washington, the fat black boy who had once made himself invisible just to survive, now stood visible and proud, a beacon for others still fighting their own battles, proof that surviving wasn't the same as living, but with the right support, both were possible.